On today's show, Giannis talking about a contract extension with the Milwaukee Bucks. That seems newsworthy. That seems like something we want to talk about on Locked On Bucks. So we're going to do it today because let's face it, anytime Giannis opens up and talks about stuff on the court or off the court, it's always an interesting read. A great article in the New York Times today. Let's discuss our takeaways.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman, the host of the show for a long time. I'm not going to say that I'm hosting this show Monday to Friday right now because we've wound it back a little bit in August, but you can also find my work over at ESPN and alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. Today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta, and we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks a major part of their life, listening whenever we drop episodes on YouTube, on the audio platforms. From September, we'll be back to the regularly scheduled programming as the countdown continues to the regular season, but just about 3 episodes a week through August. We're giving ourselves a little bit of an off season, but it's the middle of August. You think there's going to be no news, and then Giannis starts to talk about a contract, and here we are podcasting tonight on a Thursday night. So we're going to break down the article from the New York Times, but if you haven't done so yet, subscribe, drop a like, a comment, a rating, a review, any of those things. They're free to do, and it really helps the show. And I know I've been scrolling through Twitter, and there is a lot of Bucks fans chatting right now, and they want to talk about Giannis. So we're going to get to this article in the New York Times by Tanya Ganguly, and hopefully I've said that right. But I thought it was a really fascinating article overall, Frank. And we've discussed the possibility of Giannis extending, would be extension eligible here this summer. And let me just throw you this quote to get the conversation started, because I think we can go a variety of ways. So this is from very early in the article. Giannis says, the real question's not going to be this year. Numbers-wise, it doesn't make sense. But next year, next summer, it would make more sense for both parties. Even then, I don't know. I would not be the best version of myself if I don't know that everybody's on the same page. Everybody's going for a championship. Everybody's going to sacrifice time away from their family like I do. And if I don't feel that, I'm not signing. That's a pretty strong way to start the article, first of all, because it sets the scene of what could be to come. But overall, does any of that scare you? Does any of that shock you? Because we've discussed this on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously talked about how we didn't expect Giannis to sign an extension this summer, mainly because it kind of is in his best interest to, given the huge amount of money that the Bucks ownership is having to spend to invest in this team. They're going to do it again this year. They've done it the past couple of years. You want to keep the pressure on them, right? And again, it's not to say that if he signed this fall, because he becomes eligible later this fall to sign an either 2 or 3 year extension on his contract, which currently he's got 2 more years plus a player option, which he could make more money in that season, the 25-26 season, if he opts out, most likely. So odds are it would be extending with a new 3-year contract. Basically, Anthony Davis, all the numbers you see for Anthony Davis up to 186 million, those are all basically this. It's like the same type of contract basically that Giannis would be eligible to sign. He could sign it this fall, he could sign it next summer, or he could go to free agency in 2 years, opt out and sign it then as well. And we've talked about how, look, from just a, control and leverage standpoint, it's in his best interest to wait at least a year. And so I think like him just going out and saying that is, I think, interesting. And in a weird way, if there's like a silver lining, because I'll get to the other parts of this story in a moment, but I think it's almost kind of good if he just says like, look, it doesn't, basically what he said, like just putting it out there, like, doesn't make sense for me to sign this fall. So let's revisit it next summer. Obviously, then it puts huge pressure on whatever he decides next summer, potentially going into an expiring contract year if he doesn't sign an extension next summer. But I think in a weird way, maybe it's good to just sort of say that now so that, there aren't those questions following him around everywhere this fall about like, well, are you going to sign the extension? Are you going to sign the extension? Why haven't you signed the extension? Let's be clear. The Bucks would happily take Giannis's extension this fall. I think he makes, he has that comment in here, about how it may not make sense it may make more sense for both parties to do it next summer. The Bucks are totally cool doing it now. And, again, I mean, unless Giannis is privy to something I'm not, I don't think it's going to change the numbers if he signs this fall or next summer. I think it's really just more a matter of like, again, timing, visibility into where the Bucks are headed. And again, like, if you want, I think it's only natural as a Bucks fan for you to be like, well, geez, like, Giannis, we know all this stuff to be true, but do you have to go out and like say this like every couple months? Like, because that's really the downside of this is that, it's the big headline in the New York Times is like, the headline on this was that, Giannis wants to win, even if it's not in Milwaukee, right? And kind of mirroring a little bit like the Joel Embiid quote from whatever it was a month ago. And obviously the difference is like Giannis has won a title and the Bucks, there's not really like drama with the Bucks right now. So for Giannis to be sort of inviting this, it's kind of like, dude, did you need to kind of break up, the August timeframe with these statements? But again, the article is obviously more about kind of his off court, his business stuff. And of course, this is what's the most interest to most people. So look, it is what it is. I don't think it tells us anything necessarily or makes us expect necessarily something different than what we should have been expecting anyway. But I think it does underscore the fact that, like the comments he made about that he wants to play, he would love to play 20 years for the same team and be like a Dirk or a Kobe, but he's not going to put that above winning championships. I don't think that surprises any of us, but like just putting it out there, it's like, nobody was asking like necessarily that he had to put that out there, but obviously, this story, he didn't have to do this story. This is clearly something that, his team wanted out there in terms of the story about his off-court stuff. And if they didn't want this kind of stuff getting out in the universe, then it wouldn't have. So, yeah, on some level, like it's kind of like, man, like, could you be a little bit happier to be here, maybe? But the flip side is, yeah, I mean, it still makes sense, I think, to everybody.
Yeah, I think overall, one thing we've learned about Giannis is in terms of being a competitor, wanting to win, he's impatient and he wants to do it again. And it's not like he got the one title and he felt satisfied. Honestly, in terms of people talking about this, they were going to do it anyway. So to your point, and you did mention it, the fact that he said he's not signing this summer, great, cool. Now, they're still going to talk about it anyway, but at least Bucks fans know it's not happening. See what happens next year. And we've discussed the idea of pressure on the organization. I like it. Put the pressure on the Bucks. Make sure it's publicly known that you better keep working on this roster and figuring out what the next phase looks like. If not, I'll just go somewhere else. And I think that that's a totally reasonable place for Giannis to stand right now, even though we'd love him to stay in Milwaukee for his entire career. He did reference Adrian Griffin. And when you talk about where Giannis is at contract-wise, the coaching search, I thought it was a fascinating quote. I want to get to that next after we talk about today's sponsor of the podcast, which is Ibotta. And it's nearly dinner time, Frank, and picking up burgers and hot dogs for a summer barbecue. If you're doing that, you're already going to have to head to the supermarket. So why not get cash back for it? And you can do that with Ibotta. Summer's starting to run out, but it is still summer, and that can be whether it's the food for that barbecue, the clothes that you're buying, the groceries, the drinks, whatever it may be. You can do that and get cash back with each purchase with Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items from produce to personal care to pantry goods. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop to get your cash back. It's that easy. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKED. FIBA World Cup. Only a few hours away as we record this. Bobby Portis is going to be in action. Thanasis will be in action as well. So I'm sure over the next few weeks, we'll keep everyone up to date with what's going on with the FIBA World Cup, particularly with the Bucks players that are involved, Team USA, Team Greece. I know there's going to be a lot of interest there, and maybe some Joe Ingles stands out there that want to hear about what Joe's doing with Australia, who are about to play Finland in a couple of hours, and we're very, very excited about that. Adrian Griffin, Frank, new head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. And as a part of this story in the New York Times, it was referenced the fact that Mike Budenholzer was fired and Adrian Griffin hired. And this is what Giannis had to say in terms of the extension, the dynamics. He said, you've got to see those dynamics, how the coach is going to be. how we're going to be together. At the end of the day, I feel like all my teammates know and the organization knows that I want to win a championship. As long as we're on the same page with that and you show me and we go together to win a championship, I'm all for it. The moment I feel like, oh, yeah, we're trying to rebuild, then he went on to the point you said where there'll be no hard feelings with the Milwaukee Bucks. So just very, very brief reference to Adrian Griffin. But we knew this. It got to the point where the Bucks probably had to make a change. But to suggest or to think that there's no risk with making a change at the head coach, I think would be ignoring what could possibly go wrong.
Yeah, and as much as the Bucks hiring Giannis's guy, right? And I don't think I don't think there's any question that Adrian Griffin was Giannis's choice to be the head coach of this team. Yep. No matter that John Horst may say that, like, oh, Giannis had input just like every other player. Yeah, no, Giannis's input obviously carries far more weight than anyone else's. I mean, that endorsement is predicated on him actually coming in and being able to help this team win games. So if next summer it's a second round exit, or God forbid another first round exit, and Adrian Griffin looks like he wasn't ready to be an NBA head coach, I don't think Giannis is going to be sitting around saying like, hey guys, you know what, I'm going to sign the extension because you know what, that was on me. I picked the wrong the wrong head coach, or I endorsed the wrong head coach. I don't think Giannis is going to own that decision if it doesn't work out. And he's not obligated to either. It's not his job to be the kind of be all end all and the guy that picks the coach. We know that he had input. So again, that'll be something that'll be interesting to watch. And you would expect certainly that Adrian Griffin will get the benefit of the doubt from Giannis over the course of this season, and hopefully many seasons to come. And hopefully they will have a long and fruitful working relationship with one another. But again, I think it from here on out, I think it's been this way really going up to, starting with Bud's first year, right? Which is kind of when like all the extension stuff really like first started. It's going to be year to year with Giannis, and that's just part of that's just the reality of being a superstar in the NBA. And part of it's also because of Giannis making comments like these, and part of it's also going to be dependent on kind of the duration of extensions that he does hopefully sign in Milwaukee. But it will forever be, year to year. And even if he signs a multi-year extension, which hopefully he does, we've seen it now. If players decide that, a franchise is no longer committed to winning at the level that they want to win at, or maybe not even like a matter of commitment, but, with the age of the Bucks roster, if God forbid, Chris Middleton suffers a major knee injury, or Drew Holiday suffers a major injury, Brook Lopez, whatever, if something happens that kind of makes the Bucks not able to contend legitimately for a championship anymore, either this year, next year, then obviously Giannis is going to reevaluate things, and you hope that doesn't mean that he will want to leave. But again, you just never know. And I think I think too often, I think as fans, you get attached to what guys said about loyalty, and obviously Giannis has said a lot about his loyalty and wanting to stay in Milwaukee. You can't like live on comments made when guys are 23, 24, 25 years old, or even in the afterglow of a championship, right? When Giannis was talking about the fact that he didn't join a super team, right? And that how meaningful it was that they built this in Milwaukee and all that. Things change, right? And things could be different in a year. Things could be different in 2 years. Eventually, Giannis is not going to be kind of the type of individual talent that he can just, single-handedly make his team a contender. At some point, he's going to start aging. And, what is that going to mean for him, right? He's a proud guy. I think it means a lot to him that he's the best player on his team, and that when he's been on a team, it's been his team. Again, I think that's also part of the calculus. Like, where would Giannis actually go if he ever wanted to leave, right? I don't think Giannis is the kind of guy who wants to go ride somebody else's coattails. So anyway, whatever. Hopefully we won't have to kind of speculate wildly about the where would he go question anytime soon. But again, I think it's only natural, the way that the NBA kind of media landscape works these days. Any comments like these, people are going to run with it and think about it. And, let's just say I'm glad that James Harden is causing all the commotion that he is. And I expect Philadelphia will have a lot more noise than the Bucks do anytime soon. But of course, anytime Giannis makes comments like these and reminds people that, hey, he expects the Bucks to hold up their end of the bargain, then we're going to kind of go through this cycle. And again, we'll see if at some point, there is a material change in terms of his attitude towards wanting to be here. But again, I think that's probably mostly going to correlate with how good they are as a team and his perception of their ability to contend for championships, which again, the future is now. And, we'll see where they are in a year. We'll see where they are in 2 years. But for now, it's just going to be year by year.
Classy guy through and through, Giannis. We know that. Even when he's putting pressure on the organization, he does it in a way that makes you like him and you respect him for it and you understand him. That's why, as he pointed to, he's always going to be loved in Milwaukee. All right, I want to ask you about the perspective of how the Bucks front office is going to sleep tonight. Do you think this changes anything for them? Do you think they were highly aware of this entire situation and none of this is a surprise? I want to ask you about that next. So this article, and you already referenced it, and again, Tanya Ganguly, I thought it was really fascinating because, yes, there was the contract stuff. That's what we're focusing on now. There was the business stuff. There was the mental health stuff and family overall, which we know are obviously great themes that we love to read about and learn more about with Giannis. And you sort of hit on something earlier that I think is, I would imagine that the point of this article was to talk about the business and family and mental health. And of course, it starts immediately with the contract stuff, because if you are writing it and you're writing the headline, that's what's going to get the whole world to just go, holy crap, what is this article about? And click on it. We did it, and we're talking about it now on a podcast. So I wonder, with the Bucks organization, John Horst referenced a few months ago that, it's my job to try and get an extension done this summer, but it was non-committal. It was like, you can tell they don't really think it's going to happen. So it did make me wonder, how much was the Bucks front office aware of the situation? Are they feeling as much pressure as they probably should be? And then does something like this, and then perhaps depending on what happens this year, push them or lean them into doing something drastic or make big moves? Because let's face it, this offseason, they were in a lot of reports for guys that I probably wouldn't have thought they would have been in the mix for.
Yeah, I mean, like the John Collins and Brad Beal ones would be the obvious ones. And I think the Beal one was, our speculation was that was closely tied to Giannis, and that, Giannis's camp, going back a couple of years has been made it be known that that Giannis likes Brad Beal, likes the idea of playing with Brad Beal. And, again, I don't think Giannis was working through trade machine stuff to figure out how realistic that was. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily, first off, I don't think the Bucks front office, Bucks ownership, I doubt anybody was surprised by the substance of the comments. I don't think anybody is suddenly saying like, oh crap, we gotta really make that Colin Sexton trade happen now, right? Because Giannis's comments. But I think it does, again, just reiterate, jab at, pick at the reality that everybody presumably knew, which is that you are going to figure out how you transition this team over the coming years from the current kind of core four to whatever comes after that group has aged to a point where they're not just all perennial kind of like fringe all-star types, right? In the case of Chris, Drew, and Brooke, right? Because we've just kind of gotten used to like all those guys being not like automatic all-stars every year, but being in that mix. And granted, the irony is Brooke wasn't really a serious all-star candidate until last year, right? At his age, is kind of crazy that he would have his best year when he had it. But hopefully, if he's not at that level, hopefully he's close to it. So yeah, I think they know that they have to navigate that. I don't think it's a coincidence that John Horst, in the comments that he made to Eric Name, to Jim Ozarski in Vegas this year, talked a lot about youth, right? Talked a lot about the young guys that they added. But let's be realistic. Andre Jackson, Marjon Beauchamp, Chris Livingston, those guys are not the guys that are going to be, clinching Giannis's signature on an extension a year from now, right? If any of those guys have any impact on Giannis feeling optimistic about the Bucks' long-term future, that would be great, right? But to expect those guys to be, breakout guys that all of a sudden, are like, oh, they're going to be the new parts of the core four, any of those guys. I think it's pretty unrealistic to think that's going to happen in the next, year, right? In the timetable of a Giannis extension. So yeah, I don't know if it, changes anything practically. As we've been talking all summer, I think we've been just saying, like we'll call it out again. Justin's comment, our friend Justin Garcia's comment about, how he didn't think the Bucks kind of starting playoff shooting guard was on the roster yet. And I think that alludes to kind of a broader question of, adding an injection of talent, adding some, a younger talent, somebody that can potentially help with playmaking. And, that's the one obvious thing that we look at this team, right? They lost Javon Carter, they lost Joe Ingles, they had Malik Beasley, and they had some young guys that, maybe they can do something rotation wise in the regular season, but we'll see. Probably unfair to expect a whole lot of impact from them this year. So I think they're, hopefully they felt like there was work to be done, regardless of, Giannis's musings to the New York Times while, at a photo shoot for one of his companies that he's invested in. But we'll see. I mean, that, I think that's one of the things that we've been wondering all summer, right? Like, what are the odds that by the trade deadline that maybe not a big deal is made, but that some sort of deal of greater consequence to add potentially a starter, a starting guard or someone else that would be an important part of the rotation. It feels like there's a move that probably needs to happen. But when that happens, it hasn't happened this summer, and who knows with, the Lillard and James Harden situation still as muddy and foggy and unclear as ever, as much as they wouldn't be making moves for those guys specifically. Who knows if those guys not being moved yet may also be holding up like potential sort of follow-on smaller moves that maybe the Bucks could be a part of. So I think long story short, I don't think it necessarily means that John Horst is, waking up in the middle of the night, looking at Spot Track or Basketball Reference, scanning rosters for who he can trade for. But I think it just reiterates, that again, the future is now, and it's time to get back to contending for a championship and moving past what we saw last year. And obviously, the question of how you position this roster, not just for this year but beyond that, is probably the biggest question facing this franchise beyond the broader question of, can you get Giannis to sign that extension?
It's kind of exciting. We would never say the Milwaukee Bucks have been boring over the last few years, but let's face it, there hasn't been too much drama. There hasn't been too much news. So again, the idea that there is pressure on the organization and there is a real urgency to ensure that you're contending year on year. I think for me, that's exciting, but I'm looking forward to hearing how everyone else has reacted to this story. Have you just looked at it and don't care and you got on with your day? Are you stressing out and losing sleep over this? Let us know, particularly in the YouTube comments. Get involved in the show and let us know what you thought of this article in the New York Times with Giannis. It's just a little reminder, Frank, about 6 weeks away from preseason basketball, maybe a little bit less, and we'll be doing post-game podcasts again, but we'll be watching, and hopefully the Bucks are a contending team. This might be the last podcast for this week. We'll be back next week. Like I mentioned, the World Cup's on, so there may be some Bucks-related news there. And I'm sure there'll be some fallout from this article with Giannis, so make sure you are tuned in to Locked On Bucks. Subscribe, rate, review, do all those things. We appreciate it. We'll catch you next time.